All right, that's perfect. Let's get started. So we're going to talk about multifamily syndications today, and I'm going to explain. One disclaimer that I want to begin before we start is that I'm not trying to sell any property or any security through this presentation. The sole objective of this presentation is to educate people, and an offering for a security can only be made through private placement memorandum. So please, and you'll realize why I'm doing the disclaimer later on, because there are some SEC laws that prevent you from doing this kind of advertising. So just so you know, this is purely for educational purposes. My background, my name is VP. My actual name is Vaibhav Puranik, but I go by VP just to make it easier for other people. My name is not particularly intuitive. So I have 12 years of real estate experience. I've been doing real estate for a long time. I started with managing like an HOA of my condo complex, and I had to rent apartments through that and do a lot of stuff, like all sorts of studies and reserve studies and all that stuff. So really budgeting for the apartment complex. So got an experience. It's funny that I started with apartments and then went to single families. I have currently about $4 million worth of assets under management. And we recently closed a single family in not single family, a 24 unit apartment complex in Southern Oregon. And then I'm also a tech executive in a Santa Monica AI company. So, and I'm based in Los Angeles. I live near LAX. So that's about me. Before I continue with the rest of the presentation, I want to clarify one big thing, which is very important, is that whenever I use the word multifamily, I only mean 5+. And it is very important to understand that, because the rules and regulations and a lot of way the banks treat these units are different. If it is 1 to 4, then they're pretty much treated as single family, versus if it is 5 or more units, then they're treated as commercial multifamily. And that means then things are a little bit different with commercial multifamily. So I'm going to actually point out what those differences are today in this presentation. So you might ask, like, why multifamily at all, right? I mean, why not just remain in single families forever, right? And I guess the easiest answer is scale, right? Would you rather buy 20 different single families and manage them separately, separate insurances, the separate bank loans, right? All that, or would you rather have one 20-unit apartment complex where you have one insurance, one loan, and one property management company to deal with, right? So really, one of the answer is really the scale. And what this scale does is it also enables you to get better cash flows and better returns, because you get economy of the scale. And as a result, the returns are in general better in these multifamilies. One more interesting thing is loans, how the loans are sort of made to these multifamilies. What happens is when you get 4 investment property loans for single family, the big banks like Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, they won't give you any more loans for investment properties. They'll continue giving you loans for your own residence, but they will not give you loans for your 5th property, investment property, a single family property. So then you have to go to smaller banks, and these smaller banks will give you loans, but at a higher interest rate than the single family interest rate, right? Than the interest rates you were offered otherwise. So from 4 to 10, again, it's relatively easier to get a loan. But after 10, it becomes really difficult to get loans for single family, because then the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are governmental organizations, which actually back these loans, they don't back any investor that has more than 10 single family properties. So at that point, the procedure to get loans becomes even more difficult. Whereas if you are going to a multifamilies, commercial multifamilies, 5+ multifamilies, there's no such limit. You can get any loans, any number of loans as you want. And in many cases, what happens is the loans are given not to you as an individual, although you are still the signer in many cases. It's given to the LLC, and the asset for the underlying asset is sort of held as mortgage, right? So getting loans is actually easier in multifamily than a single family. If you try to get a loan for your LLC in single families, it's very difficult to do that. You'll have to pay higher interest rate again. So again, loans are easier to get. And I would say by far the most interesting things about multifamily, commercial multifamily, is how the valuation is done. In a single family, the valuation pretty much depends upon something known as comps, or comparable prices in the market, right? So if you are in a particular market and you're trying to, you have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, then the valuation, the price of that is going to get determined by how are the other, what were the sales in past 3 or 4 months in that area of the similar houses, right? And that's one way to, that's pretty much the only way I would say the valuation gets different. Whereas the way multifamily valuation works is there's actually a formula for it, and it's called your net operating income divided by cap rate is equal to value. So cap rate is something that's sort of a measure of a market. And if the market goes down, what happens is the cap rates increase. And if the market goes up, the cap rates decrease. But we don't have to need to go in detail with what a cap rate is, but let's just focus on net operating income. So net operating income is essentially whatever rent you're getting minus the expenses of the house. And the debt service is not considered in it. So the loan payment is not considered in it, but except loan service, all other expenses are sort of considered. And then whatever is left over is your net operating income. So now what happens is if you somehow figure out how to charge more rents or reduce your cost, then what will happen is net operating income will go up. And as long as the market remains exactly the same, the valuation of that multifamily will go up. So largely, the valuation of multifamily is in your hands in the sense that you can actually do something about it, right? And that's very important, that you can do something about it. That's what, and this is very powerful because let's talk an example, right? Let's take an example of if let's say you have a 20-unit complex and you manage to increase rent for every single resident by only $50. Okay, if you increase rent by $50, that means every month now you're getting 50 times 20, right? So that's like $1,000 more, correct? And over the year, you will get $12,000 more income. And let's say your cost is exactly the same. Okay, so at 5% cap rate, 1,000 divided by 0.05, right? And how much is that? Let me just do the calculator quickly. Divided by, 1,000 divided by 0.05. That's $20,000, right? So you're, hold on, let me just see. It should be more. 1,000. Sorry, 12,000. 12,000 divided by 0.05. That's $240,000. So what you just did is by increasing rent by $50, you increased valuation of your property by $240,000. So isn't that amazing? I mean, I'm not sure if you can do that similar thing in a single family unless you make like some sort of addition or, add extra bathroom or something like that. But to me, that is the biggest driver for commercial multifamilies. And Another interesting thing about multifamily is LLCs and syndications. So what syndication allows you to do is pool money from different people to actually buy a bigger property. And that's very powerful because you can get together, work with other people, and just you can use other people's money, right? So these are the reasons I am attracted to multifamily, and that is why I think multifamily is a very powerful concept. So then there's one more advantage. One thing you might ask is that, okay, well, why go to multifamily? Why I might just use do REIT investments, right? A real estate investment trust, right? Which you can buy a REIT in like sort of stock market. Why do you even have to go through headache of owning the property yourself, right? And one major advantage is that it allows people to participate. It allows everybody to participate in paper losses. So when you go through REIT, right, it's not the same as owning a house yourself. REITs do not allow you to. So when you own a multifamily like this, the people who are running this multifamily will give you a form called K1, Schedule K1. And that Schedule K1 will have your share of paper loss or depreciation, right? And that means the depreciation sort of gets divided equally, not equally, but in the proportion of their investment in all the investors in the property. And this is very powerful. That means if you are getting some income from this property, cash flow, if your depreciation is more than that, then you are essentially deferring that tax until the property gets sold. So this is a very, very powerful concept. And most of you own single families right now, right? And so you understand what a depreciation is. So and you can use one property's depreciation for other properties' income as well, right? So this is very powerful. That means it's very useful to essentially all of us. So that's why REITs don't do that. So now let's go through the whole syndication process and how this process works. What are some legal and technical terms in it? Again, I want to give a disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer or a CPA. So even though I'll explain some of the tax concepts and legal concepts, if you want to actually do this yourself, make sure you consult with your professional lawyer or a tax consultant so that you verify all the information that I'm giving. Okay. So the syndication, I can define syndication in a very simple way. A syndication is essentially a pooling of money to buy a real estate asset, right? In this case, it's a real estate asset, so a multifamily or an apartment building, right? So how does it work? Like what are the steps in syndication, right? So in syndication, what happens is there are generally either one person or a group of people who are known by either sponsors or syndicators or general partners. And these people are supposed to know what they're doing. These are the people who have relationships with people like brokers, right? So they get a deal in front of them, right? They get an apartment building that they are interested in buying, right? Now, one interesting difference that I want to point out here is that in case of single families, there is a concept of MLS, right? Multiple listing service. And you can go to Zillow, Redfin, and all these websites, and any property that's on market instantly appears there. And you can essentially know that this particular property is in market. But in multifamily, that's not how it works. There is actually a website called loopnet.com where you can go and look at what's on the market. But I would say only about 5 to 10% properties actually go on LoopNet. And rest 85, 90% properties, right, do not appear and in any one single website, just like Redfin or Redfin or Zillow. So then how does this lead sponsor even gets a deal? And the answer is this person has to just like make build relationships with brokers, right? And these brokers are spread out again. You depending on what your market is, you build relationship in brokers in that market, and then these brokers will start sending you these deals. And then so what happens is when the deal comes, right? You do financial modeling for the deal. You go through very detailed exercise to figure out whether this financial model, is this property going to be financially viable, right? And in a rough, you have to also sort of finalize a rough business plan. And what that business plan means is what sort of improvements you're going to do in order to increase rents. Because remember what I said earlier, right? Is the plan here is to acquire a multifamily asset, an apartment complex, and figure out how to increase the rent. And people are not just going to give you rent because you're asking it, right? You need to give something in back to those people, right? That means you need to do some improvements in the property, which will command more rent in the market. So that's what is called business plan. That means it's a business that you're buying. What are the improvements you're going to make to that so that you can command higher income or higher revenue for the business? So let's say you do financial modeling, and there are various kinds of models available in the market. I personally use, there's a guy called Michael Blank, who's very famous. He has a book written too. I use his model called SDA. And it's like a Excel spreadsheet with like 7 or 8 different tabs. And there is all sorts of syndication parameters. And then you can play with various numbers to figure out whether something is going to be viable or not. So I use that model, and then let's say the model tells me that, okay, this is viable property, right? Then you go back to the broker and submit something known as letter of intent. Right? And letter of intent is not binding. It just tells you that I intend to, or we intend to purchase this property at this particular price, right? And these are the sort of high level terms. And at the same time, you're also talking to banks, and what these banks are doing are they're going through the details that you have so far, the income of the property, the model sort of that you have, the business plan that you're going to do, and they're going to tell you whether they will give loan for this property or not, right? And if they're going to give you the loan for this property, they'll give you approximately the interest rate and what are the different terms. And I'm going to talk about the terms are slightly different in these kind of loans, so I'm going to talk about that later. But so you're also doing that parallelly, right? And then what happens is when you know that, oh, you're going to get loan for this property, then you're going to go ahead and negotiate purchase and sale contract, PSA, right? And at that point, all the details sort of get finalized. It's what exactly the purchase price is, how much is the due diligence period, right? And the due diligence periods are higher, like they're longer in these kind of properties. And a single family home usually gets closed in about 30 days, right? Whereas apartment complexes like they at least require 60 days, and sometimes it can even go to 90 days, right? And you know how there are contingencies in single family houses? There are certain places where there are also those kind of contingencies where after that point, the money becomes hard. And that means the deposit that you've made initially becomes non-refundable, right? So it's a similar concept. But before you get there, you need to do a lot of due diligence. And I actually have a slide later on to see what kind of due diligence you need to do. But there is inspection, there could be environmental inspection. You need to do more stuff with, you have to walk through every single unit because there's 20, 30, 40 units, right? So you need to do that kind of due diligence. And after due diligence, you feel confident that, okay, I'm going to go ahead with this unit, this apartment complex, because it's pretty good, right? I like it. It's financially viable, right? So then at that point, what you do is you pitch this property to investors. And these are the other people that are going to passively invest in the property. And these are also known as limited partners. So the people who are doing the transaction themselves are called general partners, or the lead sponsors, or syndicators, right? Now, people who are going to just invest and not take any decisions, right? They are known as limited partners. Yeah. Correct. And then if some of those investors, you have to present all sorts of numbers, right? You have to present what could be the return if you invest in this property. If you invest $100,000 or $50,000 in this property, what is the return you will get? What is the internal rate of return is expected out of this? What kind of cash flow, cash distributions expected, right? What is the equity multiple of it? Like what is the hold period? If we hold this property for 5 to 7 years, and generally what I've seen is 5 to 7 year hold, is if you hold it for up to 5 to 7 years and then sell it after 5 to 7 years, what kind of returns you will get, and what your initial investment of $100,000, will it become 2x or will it become 2.5x? Will it become twice? So you have to present all of that. And then when you present all of that, some of them will commit and some of them will say, no, this is not a good investment for me, right? So let's say those investors comes and then the LLC gets formed and syndication gets prepared. Now, the most common rule under which the syndication gets prepared is called 506B. What happens is, it's important to know that why SEC or Securities and Exchange Commission is involved here. So what happens is, what really you're doing is you're getting an LLC form and you're sort of selling a share of that LLC to these investors, right? Because of that, SEC gets involved, because SEC's the reason SEC is formed is to protect investors' right? So now what happens is, if you want to sell any kind of share, then you need to sort of create your offering and then go to SEC and say, this is my offering. And the SEC then sits on them for months and months, and then they like vet you, they ask you thousands of questions, and then they approve it. So that's how a public offering gets made, correct? So if your company wants to go public, then you have to file under SEC, and then SEC will like take months of process, and then they'll tell you whether you're allowed to go ahead with public offering or not, right? But of course, you can't wait that long just to buy one apartment complex or property, right? So then there's a regulation D in SEC rules, which tells you who is exempted from this kind of filing. So one of the most popular exemption that people go for is called 506B. There's 504, there's 506C. There are many kind of regulations, right? And in 506B, what happens is it requires people to get investments or only from people that you know, right? So you're not allowed to invest with strangers, right? And the reason is simple, because the SEC doesn't want you to invest with strangers and lose your money, right? So that means you need to have a pre-existing relationship with the syndicator before investing in it, or if you are a syndicator, then you need to have a pre-existing relationship before sort of investing it. So this is very important that now if you go under 506C, then you don't need to have a pre-existing relationship. Okay, so that is an interesting distinction between 506B and 506C. In 506C, you're allowed to advertise your syndication, whereas in 506B, you're not allowed to advertise your syndication. So these are some of the important rules. In 506B, you can only have 35 sophisticated investors, and then the rest of the people must be accredited investors. And let me tell you what an accredited investor is. An accredited investor is someone who, and these rules keep changing, so but at this moment, if what I know is correct, then if your net worth, excluding your house, where you're residing, is more than $1 million, or you're making $200,000 or more in last couple of years, or $300,000, including your spouse, and you think reasonably you'll continue to make that kind of income for the next couple of years, right? Then you can be called as accredited. And again, the reason these rules are there is to protect investors. The SEC doesn't want people who don't know what they're doing, or to actually invest in syndications, right? All these rules are meant to protect investors, right? I've seen some lawyers which they don't even want to go to sophisticated, because the definition of sophisticated investor is not very clear, but the definition of accredited investor is very clear. So I've seen lawyers who form syndications only with accredited investors. They say that if you have a sophisticated investors, then we're not going to bother, because there is, the lawyers are also liable for doing all that kind of work. So these regulations also require you to give something known as PPM, or private placement memorandum. And this private placement memorandum is a document which it could be it could be pretty big, actually, 40, 50, 60, 70 pages, right? And what this does is it's going to have all sorts of projections for the property. It's going to have like risks involved in investments, right? All of stuff you're supposed to document, and your lawyer will help you do that. And you're supposed to give that document to them, and the investors will read that document and sign that document if they're investing it, or if they're okay with the risk mentioned in there, right? Then investors sort of wire the money, right? And before all this happening, I'm assuming that your loan is approved by this time. And then you give your PPM to your investors. Investors sort of signed on it. They wired the money, right? And the deal is closed. Now, some people might say, oh, a big milestone is achieved, the deal is closed, right? But the work does not stop here. The work actually begins here, because the most important thing here is now you need to execute your business plan, right? You need to now say that, all right, I'm going to make those improvements. To actually be able to increase the rent that you have already promised to your investors, correct? So to me, the fun begins at that point. It doesn't stop here. Okay, so the legal term, I think I explained all of these things, but general partners and limited partners. The general partners are the people who are running the syndications. They're also called syndicators, right? And limited partners are the people who are just investing in there. In a lot of cases, the liabilities are lie with the general partners, right? Whatever the liabilities are. So they take more risk as well, right? The limited investors they don't have any liability because they're not the decision makers, right? General partners are the managing members of the LLC, versus the limited partners are non-managing members of the LLC. Class A and Class B shares, usually Class A shares are given to the investors, and Class B shares are given to the managing partners or the general partners. Because again, it looks like security, right? Sort of. So that's why you have to, the lot of language is similar here. I already mentioned about 506B versus 506C. In 506C, you're allowed to advertise the syndication, whereas 506B, you need to have a pre-existing relationship with the investors. I already mentioned what accredited investors and sophisticated investors said. I already talked about pre-existing relationship. So I think I explained everything on this slide. So let's talk about financial due diligence, right? What kind of financial model you do. So what you're seeing right now is one of the example sort of financial model, right? So you're sort of taking the all rent, you have some money for sort of written off for vacancy. Then you have all the expenses, right? Then you have debt service, which is the loan payment that you will make, right? So principal, interest, both, right? And you have to assume some sort of increase in the expenses as the years go by. You have to also assume some sort of increase in the rent, right? And you can see what's the percentage of rent increases essentially assumed here. And then based on that, you can have a cash flow available for distribution. And what you can see is, you can see that a cash flow available for distribution increases as the more time is spent, like more years go by. And one of the simplest reasons for that is because, you know how I gave you an example of increasing rent by $50? You cannot do that in one night in most cases, because these people have leases, right? And those leases don't expire in like one day in the year, right? Somebody's lease might expire today, somebody's lease might expire tomorrow, somebody's lease might expire, the next month, So when the lease expired, you can go to them and increase the rent. Also, if the rent increase warrants you to make some improvements, then you need to start doing that improvements. So if you are doing kitchen upgrade is one of your improvement, then you really can't do that kitchen upgrade while the tenant is living there, right? So then what you need to do is you need to wait for the tenant to leave, then make the upgrades, and then put the unit back in the market at a higher rent, right? So all of this could take 2 or even 3 years, right? And that's why anybody who just assumes that the rent can be increased quickly, right, is making a mistake, right? So that's why just keep in mind that the cash flow that you get from such properties it increases as you have a more hold time, right? So this is just one of the tabs that we have in financial modeling, the deal analyzer, like syndicated deal analyzer that I use. Now you might say, well, how does these syndicators make money? So they get compensated by 4 different fees that I've seen in the industry. Okay, it could be different based on each deal, right? So there's no I can give you rough numbers of what people are charging, but again, it depends. Those numbers are also different between whether it's a 20-30 unit or whether it's a 100-200 unit complex, right? But generally, they're compensated by 4 different ways. One is called acquisition fee, and it is a small fee, generally 1%, 2%, 3% sort of the deal size given to the syndicator when they get the deal, because they have to spend significant effort to actually get a deal and then put their own money at stake, right? And then it's a long 2-3 month process to go through this. So it's very common in the industry to give them acquisition fee, right? Then asset management fees. So this is a fee that gets charged ongoing basis, and that's to run the property, right? To execute the business plan, sort of. And it's usually I've seen 1 or 2% as well, right? In smaller properties, 1, but it could be 3%, 4% in a higher, 100, 200 units as well. And disposition fees is when if the property gets sold, right? At that point, it's a similar thing. It's essentially same as acquisition fee, but it's a reverse. It's when you're selling, right? And just to see through that transaction, because there's a lot of work involved there, right? And then manager equity. This is where the syndicators actually make money, right? So the fees that I mentioned earlier, right? That's not where a syndicator makes money. But manager equity is where what happens is you're giving 20-30% of the equity of the whole deal to the syndicators. And if they invest their own money, which most people do, then they get additional. So what happens is, let's say you give 20% of equity to managers, then the rest of the 80% gets proportionally divided into the limited partners. And so really their investment are getting the 80% of the equity, sort of a proportion taken in 80% of equity. Now, you might say, well, that's unfair, right? But I think it's not unfair because there's a lot of work these people do. And more than that, what this does is it creates alignment of interest between the limited partners and the general partners. And what that means is that whatever is in their interest, in this case, the manager or the syndicators are then incentivized to actually increase the value of the property and then sell the property, because they're not going to get anything until the properties get sold. This equity is only on paper, right? So these people then try really hard to execute the business plan really well, and then actually sell the property so that they can realize that 20% equity and hence the gain on the profit, right? So really this creating this alignment of interest is very important, right? And that's, so the syndicators make money at the end of the whole thing. They don't make money on an ongoing basis. The fees are there to sort of keep them afloat, to make sure that they can keep running the business. Right? By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and ask, because just unmute yourself and ask the question, because I'm sure I'm giving a lot of information. So it might be better to just get clarified, right there.
Yeah, VPP, my question is, would this recording be available later? Because I may need to go prepare some dinner.
Yeah, well, I'm going to record it, so you can get a recording of this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's, unless anyone else have any other questions, we can move forward.
I have one question. It's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
My question is around the GP and the LP. Are the GP and the LP two separate entities?
No.
Yeah.
They're not entities. I mean, they're people.
Okay.
They're two separate people, right? Limited partners are the people who are just investors in the deal, whereas syndicators is somebody like me, or if you are an aspiring syndicator, then you are, right, too. These are the people who actually put together the syndication.
So
these are partners.
How do you, right? So the GP control the asset and have the management, the asset, and have control over what to do with the asset, the apartment that they bought, and the LP is basically just throw in the money and receive like 8%, 12% every yearly or quarterly. But how do we buy the house? So do we pool everything into one LLC and have the money in LLC and use that money in LLC to buy a property?
Correct. Yeah. In fact, in a lot of times the LLC gets formed at the exact time. It's LLC meant for this one property.
Got it.
Okay. So it's not even, it doesn't even have any other properties.
Got it. Okay. And then how we split the GP section and LP section, that goes into the operating agreement. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Got it. That makes sense. Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and sure, yeah.
Yeah, so and these properties that I guess we're seeking, are they going to be within the state? I mean, I'm within California, or is it going to be different states, or how?
It can be in any state. It doesn't matter.
It could be any state.
Yeah, it basically, yeah. And usually what happens is if let's say the property is in Texas, then you'll form probably an LLC in Texas. And but the investors and GPs can live wherever they want in the United States. So it doesn't matter.
And property managers, would that already be set in there, having a property manager taking care of the properties, or how would it?
Yeah, so one thing that I didn't mention, and I have a slide about due diligence, but property manager, it's good to have property manager finalized before the deal closes. In fact, it's good to finalize a property manager as soon as you have your market nailed down, because you want the property manager to be with you in the inspection when you're doing the inspection, so that the property manager can give their opinion about the property as well. So you want to make sure that the property manager has physically seen the property before you close the deal to remove the risk in the process.
Okay. All right. And you would already have that, like property managers or contractors, in case you have to, there's some vacant properties already or things that are not renting, huh?
No, I mean, yeah, the property manager will give you opinion whether you should go ahead with this deal or not, right? Because they are sort of partners. So let's say you decide that I'm going to, let's just take an example of Austin, Texas. Okay. It's actually very expensive, but still you want to invest in Austin, Texas. The first thing you'll do is You will make some relationship with brokers, but you'll also make relationship with property managers in Austin. And then you'll actually select one property manager and say, I like this person really, I can deal with this person. And then whenever you have a property, you will go to that property manager and take his or her opinion as well before proceeding. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I just want to, I guess what I'm trying to say is you would already have a team available.
Correct.
Before
Correct.
the deal finalizes.
That's absolutely right. 100% right. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, so what you're seeing right now is a financial due diligence. So it's like you get data like this from brokers, and you have to pour over this data and find out where the problems is and what can you fix, right? So one of our previous properties, we found out that the water bill was usually more than usual. And then we found out in the inspection that the toilets are really old and they're flushing too much water down. So as a result, of water and sewer, both bills are high. So the fix was easy. Like one of the item in business plan was to change all the toilets. And it's not even that expensive to change all the toilets. And that will save money, right, in water bills. And it's a good thing to do also, right, environmentally, right? You're also like helping the environment by reducing water usage. So then you have to spot problems in this, right, and figure out whether the property is viable business or not. What kind of physical due diligence is done, right? One of the most important things, in-person inspection. You have to walk every single unit, even if it's 20 units, 30 units, 40 or 100 units, right? The best practice is that you must walk every single unit. If you're not walking every single unit, you might find a surprise. Like one of my properties, there was a unit that we walked, and that unit was so much in shambles. There was trash everywhere, and oh my God, like I've never seen something like that before. And if we would have avoided going to, and every single other units were all fine. So just imagine a situation where we have walked into every single other unit and we did not walk that unit. Then, we would have like budgeted less money for making improvements, right? So it's important that you walk every single unit. And wherever there are fixes, make sure that actual contractor gives you a quote. Like don't just assume that, oh, this probably can be done in this much money. There are always surprises. Make sure you verify every single lease. Your bank will probably make you do that anyways, but still, right? Engage in new property manager early on. I just talked about that. Make sure you thoroughly check out rents in other complexes nearby to make sure that they're in similar configuration, so that you can get an idea about what kind of rents you can charge, right? Is this property already under market rent or at market rent, right? So you need to do all of that due diligence yourself. And of course, location, right? Is the location important? Are there any businesses nearby? Is there a constant supply of renters, right? So you have to, of course, go through the location parameters. Are the same for any real estate, right? No matter whether it's a commercial real estate, is it a warehouse, or whether it's a single family house, or that you can't, the first rule of real estate is location, location, and location. So we do all of this due diligence, right? And this is a capital stack example, meaning, let's say you're buying a $1.9 million sort of apartment complex. And out of that, so about $450,000 or $500,000 is your sort of the down payment that you need to make, right? And in this case, what we've ended up raising is $650,000, so about $150,000 more than what's required. And so you might ask, well, why are we doing that? Right? The reason is simple: is to make the improvements, right? Where's the money going to come from, right? So, so you have to budget for all of those things earlier, right? Later on, you cannot go back to your investors and say, I need more money, right? So if you want to replace roof, then you make sure whatever the cost of replacement of roof is budgeted there, right? And then if 1.5, so you're raising more than down payment, right? And then the debt 1.4 million, the terms are slightly different. So this is an example terms, right? This is a 10-year balloon with 30-year amortization. And what that means is the loan is actually, the loan term is just 10 years. The payment per month, it's calculated based on 30-year loan. But after 10 years, the payment becomes due. The entire amount of loan becomes due, right? Whatever is remaining. And 3.8, I'm just giving an example, 3.8 interest rate. Now, one thing to note is, which is a big difference between single family and multifamily loans, is that in multifamily loans, there's usually a step down prepayment penalty. Not step down, sorry, the prepayment penalty. And one of the type of prepayment penalty is a step down penalty. And that means that if you actually return the money, you want to refi, right, your loan, and return the money to the bank will charge you extra. They are saying, no, don't return money earlier. If you want to return money earlier, then you must pay extra. So this is, I've never seen this in single family world, but I mean, multifamily, almost every single time I've seen step down prepayment penalty. So not step down, but any kind of prepayment penalty. And prepayment penalty can be different types. Step down is one kind of penalty. Yield maintenance is another kind of penalty. Yield maintenance is kind of complex, but step down is easy to examine. Let's say this is a 10-year loan, right? So step down penalty means if you return your in first 2 years, then 5% penalty. Then you return on, you pay 5% of the loan amount extra. If you return on third and fourth year, then it's 3% penalty. If you return fifth and sixth year, then it's 2% penalty. If you return in like seventh and eighth year, seventh and eighth year, then it's 2% penalty. So as the number of years go by, your prepayment penalty decreases, and that's one way to step down prepayment penalty.
Sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess when we put in all our money in the LLC and we purchase the property, we're holding it for 10 years. Is that what we're saying?
No, the loan is given for 10 years. That doesn't mean you will hold it for 10 years. You can, if you plan to hold it for 7 years, then you need to calculate your exit based on that prepayment penalty. So when you're calculating returns for your investors, that all will be baked in, okay? Also, there are some cases in which even though the loan is 10 years, the prepayment penalty only is for 5 years. That means that would be ideal, right? Because then after that means after 5 years you sell, there'll be zero prepayment penalty. So there are cases like that. There are cases where the prepayment penalty goes until the last year, or there are cases where the prepayment penalty ends in sometime in the middle, and then after that selling becomes easier. But even if it lasts for entire 10 years, what this means is that you have to change your financial model and make sure you bake that cost in. And if your valuation has increased by a lot, right, then you might be able to afford this penalty and still make a lot of money on it. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now business plan, right? What kind of business plans are there, general, right? So I told you about one just now, which is reducing water usage, right? By changing toilets, faucets, and a lot of states and a lot of government agencies actually subsidize this. So it's a win-win-win, right? Essentially, they'll come and change. I know in Oregon, they'll give you all the bulbs and all that stuff, LED bulbs. So you don't have to send your own money, right? You just go and replace them. So there's a entity called Energy Trust of Oregon, and they encourage you to do this kind of stuff. If it's a master meter property, that means there's no separate electric meters. Then if you add a solar to it, then you can reduce the cost drastically, right? There's interior upgrades, there's exterior upgrades. You can paint the building, make it look nice. The last one is repositioning, and that's a little bit more complex and might require more experience and more maneuvering. And that means, let's say you have a student housing and you're converting them to family housing, right? So there may be permits involved, like, or it's a C-class property and you're upgrading it and making it a B-class property. You are basically going to upgrade all the kitchens, upgrade all the units, and then going to start rent it to higher class of economic class tenants, right, with a higher sort of rent. So be very careful about that, because it's a process that needs to be managed very carefully. So there's a more risk in it, but there's also more return in it, because it's difficult to do, but at the same time, you are able to command high returns if you actually switch the class of the property. So that's another lot of experienced syndicators who do that kind of, their business plan involves this kind of things. Now, what are the risks, right? I mean, I think these risks are for investors, not really for syndicators, but I can tell you, if the syndicator can run away with your money, right? You put in money and the syndicator runs away with money. So of course you have to vet the syndicator, ask the questions, look at their reputation, right? All that stuff. The property may burn down, and this exists for all of us, right? Our houses can burn down. Of course, have adequate insurance, right? These first two are unlikely, not because remember there's criminal penalties for running. It's a criminal offense to run away with your money, right? So the law enforcement is going to catch you, right? And so the possibility of somebody just running your money is very less. The next two are real possibilities, which is the syndicator makes wrong assumptions, right? And this actually does happen, but it depends on what kind of assumptions were wrong. If they were wrong off a little bit, then it doesn't affect that much. Maybe your return might go down from 15% to 12% or 15% to 14%. No big deal, right? But if the syndicator does something wildly different, wrong assumption, then it could be a problem. So I guess for investors, they need to ask more questions, make sure that the syndicators have done it. By the way, there's a book which is very interesting, and it's written by Brian Burke. It's called The Hands-Off Investor. And this book is actually meant for passive investors or limited partners to vet people. Like it sort of introduces you the whole thing and says, you should be asking these questions to people, right? You should be looking at these documents, and it should be, so the book is very detailed, and I think it's almost written for general partners, in my opinion. It's too detailed for limited partners. But even if you do like some of the stuff that's mentioned there, then the investors will be way better off. Mismanagement, no. The execution of the business plan is not good. There's not enough oversight on the property managers, right? Those things can legitimately happen, right? Again, here, it depends on how off they are and what kind of, you have to essentially ask questions, get quarterly updates from them. And syndicators should also give quarterly updates to those people so that, the investors are in the loop of what's happening and they feel comfortable. I think that's pretty much it. Those who are interested in working with me in any capacity, I'm always, looking for people to work with me in different capacities as partners or in any capacity, right? You can contact me. I'll be happy to have a call with you, individual call with you, explain what I'm doing, what I've done, what kind of stuff I'm interested in future. And then if you want to partner up or, all those options are sort of open. So my website is oldmoneycapital.com. And my email address is there. We can schedule a Zoom call or, and talk more about it. Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question. When underwriting, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. When underwriting a property or multifamily apartment, there are a few things like replacement reserve or capital improvement, and people are using it very interchangeably or depend on how they use it. my question is, how do you gauge the annual cost per unit per year? Let's say you're in Austin market and you have a 24 unit. How do you gauge this this sort of like the capital reserve on the side in case for like a raining day?
That's a good question. I mean, there are a lot of rule of thumbs for that. And it's kind of difficult to arrive at because those rule of thumbs change based on how big the apartment complex is. Something like 20 unit, right? I would say that you need to have higher reserve, like $2,000-3,000 per unit, right? And something like 100 unit or past, I think $1,000 per unit is good enough. So I think what you have to do is you have to underwrite a lot of deals, right? And understand, and then as you get more and more experienced, you start understanding what those rule of thumbs would be and how will they be, what size they're applicable at. So I think that's one way to know what those rules are.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
When you underwrite the deal, I say as an investor, would you be okay to show us all the information? See what? So I like to go over everything as well, you know, and figure out. So you make sure the numbers are right, and there's no, because you could make any spreadsheet look really well, make it everything.
That's correct.
You know?
That's
Yeah,
correct.
so,
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, yeah, and especially, yeah, I'm willing to do that. And especially it's true is if the partner is investing like significant amount of money, then it's definitely worth it. I've seen other people doing it, and I'll be willing to do that too. But yeah, it does happen.
okay, thank you.
Hey, VP, I have a question. When you're underwriting a property, generally, how much do you factor in per unit for repairs or maintenance?
So repairs is very vague word because it really depends on what you need to do. So in your due diligence phase, if you figure out that, okay, I need to replace the roof, right? Then you're going to have to keep a lot of more money aside, right? But in general, right, if aside from capital purchase, right, for a 20 unit apartment complex, I would keep at least $2,000 per unit, and I would be comfortable with $3,000 per unit. So $50,000 to $60,000, $40,000 to $60,000.
Okay, that's a capital reserve, right? And you're talking about CapEx, but
no, not CapEx. I would even keep it. See, that's what called conservative underwriting, right? Conservative underwriting means that you're saving, you're keeping more money for the rainy day, so that no matter what happens, you don't have to. You have to reserve. You don't have to. So I would not feel comfortable for less than $2,000 unit for a 20 unit complex.
Well, I was kind of meaning that, you know, I look at some T12s and it seems like they're, you know, some owners are running the property pretty lean where their maintenance is barely anything, right? So when I'm underwriting, I'm factoring about $600-700 per unit per year for maintenance.
So it depends. I think $600-700. Sorry, I wasn't talking about maintenance actually. Maintenance is different. I'm talking about just a reserve, operating reserve. So maybe I misunderstood your question.
I might have been not clear. So
yeah, maintenance rate depends on property. I think what you're saying, it depends on whether you consider turnover part of that or not, right?
No turnovers, just straight maintenance. Yeah,
okay. Then it could be, I would say it sounds right, or even maybe $1,000 just to be very conservative. But I think then it makes sense to me. But yeah, $600-700 makes sense to me.
Yeah, because some of the T12 I look at, like even for 20 units, right? They're averaging like $200 a unit per year, right? So that comes out to be about what, $2,400 for maintenance, and I feel that that's extremely low, but you know, that's according to what the T12 was provided. So you know, and when I'm doing my underwriting,
keep in one thing though, that one thing I do is, which would be worth doing it, is I make a spreadsheet and compare like expenses of properties in an area to get an idea of what is a usual way, usual water bill, or what is usual utilities, or what is, now it's hard because, but I think per unit you can do it much better. So I think what I would encourage you to do is, if you're looking at multiple properties, right, put them side by side and compare those numbers. And that'll give, because you can't just trust what these people give in T12. And as a result, you have to have your own sort of due diligence done, right? And one way to do that due diligence is to compare multiple properties and put them side by side and see whether this makes sense or not. So you might see in one of the documents of one property, you might see that they have used this much, like $600 per maintenance, and some other properties using 700, and some other properties using 400. Then you can take average and then figure out, or mean, and figure out what should be your underwriting be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty brilliant to do. Never thought about that. Usually I just factor in about $600-700 for maintenance for the year per unit. But cool. that makes a lot of sense though, VP. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Any other questions?
VP?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you show us like okay, this is good deal, this is cash flow, how you count, like, you know, like in general? I know like you have to have a gross income minus expenses, but at least you know, okay, this is a cash flow, and then what else do you, how you, the formula, and then how you look after formula, then you look for the location and what else?
It's actually tough to say that, because it requires like a whole sort of not necessarily course, but there's a lot more than, you know, this to understand that. I think you'll have to like familiarize yourself. You have to take like some sort of online course, like not long course, but or to understand how this underwriting is done, because it's complex, right? It's a so one thing that happens is if you buy the syndicated deed analyzer from Michael Bank, it comes with like set of videos, and those videos show you how to do underwriting, right? And that the syndicated deed analyzer only costs like $128. So I think that's one way I would do it, to learn all of those things. And then I might be able to guide you, but not from the scratch. I think you have to know some in order to, you know, even ask good questions. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Maya?
Yeah. Okay. But at least you know, I know how to count. Okay, net operating net, your net. You know how much your net, and then minus your mortgage, minus all your expenses. Then how much you take home? Maybe $100, $200. That is cash flow. I know, but at least I have like you know, a little bit like blueprint, and okay, this deal is good, you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The blueprint is in one of those deal analyzers, right? So the blueprint, one metric people use is that if you are getting more than, say, 14% IRR, or 12 to 14% IRR to your investors, then it's probably a good deal, right? So there are rules like that, right? You could see, it depends, like 5% cash flow, right? Is that a good deal? So it could be a good deal for one person, or some person might say, well, I need at least 8% cash flow, correct? So I think those numbers vary from person to person, syndicator to syndicator, on what they are more comfortable with, and investor to investors, what these investors are willing to accept. So it's harder for me to give you like a number and say that, oh, this is a good deal if you have this number achieved.
You say, what should I buy? Like a software or something that
Yeah,
can
take a look
calculate-
at syndicated deal analyzer from Michael Blank. If you
Syndicate-
just like
Say it again,
syndicated
please.
deal analyzer, syndicated deal analyzer from Michael Blank.
Could you type that for me?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just type it in the chat section. I'm going to,
I do understand what you're saying, BP, because there's a lot of formulas, but you have to try to figure out the bigger problem, you know, because you're just running numbers. But if you have to understand everything that you're looking at.
correct. Yeah, there's actually an excellent course. If you email me, I can find out. There's like a whole one guy who just specializes in like really analyzing deals, and not just that, he actually explains you from what is IRR. Like he explains all the basics really well. Okay, it's like a $500 course. Okay, so if you are interested, if you email me later, I'll find out that person, that course, and then send you information about it.
Sounds good.
I have do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I have a question around risk analysis, and I wanted to know what type of stress test do you include in your underwriting model?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest stress test is, I think you have to model and say, it depends, right? You can't be, if you're too conservative, if you're too optimistic, then you'll miss out something. If you're too conservative, then all the good deals will also go away from you, right? You'll end up like passing good deals, right? So you know what can go wrong in the property, right? Like roof can go wrong, right? You have to factor in those major things, right? And say, if this happens, what is the probability of that happening, right? If you have actually had a roof inspector there, and the roof inspector has said that this roof is good, then the probability of that happening in 5 to 7 years is very low, right? So then you don't need to necessarily provide for it. So the stress test is to essentially look at what are the major things that can go wrong, then assess the probability of that, and then provide money for that, right? Provide enough reserve to cover those things, right? And then you can even create multiple scenarios: optimistic scenario, the middle scenario, and a conservative scenario, right? So I think that, am I answering your question?
What about refinance? So let's say some investor need to exit in this year, and then you didn't consider when the investor want to exit, and you didn't know how much money they need to raise to cover that gap. So those are like probably one of the stress tests, and I don't really understand.
Yeah.
So if you can share some insight.
So it depends. I mean, if you want to do that stress test, right? I usually tell the investors that, look, real estate is not a liquid investment. And if you don't want to hold for 5 to 7 years, then just don't invest with me, right? Or find someone who is equally good and have that person buy your share. And as long as the syndicator approves it, right, it should be okay. So as long as I'm willing to vet that person, it should be okay. So I don't necessarily do that, because in a smaller deals, it's a too much headache, right? If you're doing maybe 100, 200 unit, then I think what you're saying, everything has like a sort of a, when that thing becomes viable, right? So those kind of stress tests, I think, are suitable for bigger properties than smaller multifamilies. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Hey, VB.
Yeah.
I got a question. When you're raising the funds, so you're raising the funds also for any repairs that may be done, or can be done or like quickly, or do you use some of the reserve funds? Like, is it all raised with the syndication? Like, you got to replace a roof or replace windows and all that type of stuff.
Can you repeat your question, because it was a little bit harder for me to hire? Yeah.
Sorry. So if you're doing syndication, are you including the repairs that you need to do throughout the years? Are you including the price in the syndication?
Yeah, in the money that we are raising, right? Yeah. So if you notice my example that I gave you a few slides ago, right, actually showed that even though the down payment was about 400K, 450K, or maybe 500K, we had raised 650K.
Okay.
And that was precisely the purpose for that. That was precisely the purpose of to set money aside for capital expenses.
Okay. And also another question I had, sorry. How is there a time when you keep a property unlimited, or with syndication, do you always get rid of it at some point? Like, do you have to get rid of it, or do you just pay the people out and then you can keep it yourself for a lifetime and pass it down?
It's in general, right? It depends on every investor, every syndicator, right? But in my case, I like to actually sell the property at the promised period, or even before, if possible.
So I'm trying to see, like, what I'm trying to figure out here is, like, if you're doing this, like being a GP, isn't there a point that you just don't want to do it no more? You just want the properties to generate the funds for you, and you just sit back and just manage?
Yeah, it makes sense. But remember that when you're a GP, you can't have your own interest in your mind. You've taken money from some other people, right? Their interest should be supreme for you. Otherwise, don't become a GP and don't do a syndication. Correct? Because does that make sense? Because these are the people who are entrusting your money, and if you're promised them, then you're going to sell them in 5 to 7 years, then you need to do that. And there is all sorts of GPs do. Now, if you want to change your plan, then generally what I've seen people doing is they put out for vote. And the investors vote. And then if the majority of the investors say that, okay, let's hold it for more period, then it might make sense.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
But you can't decide it yourself, because I think it's unfair to the investors who got in that deal, assuming that you're going to sell it in 5 to 7 years.
So when is there a time that you retire? And if you retire doing all this stuff, being a GP, when is a time that you will not need to do this anymore? Because you eventually end up with zero.
Well, it depends on, and I don't know whether I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, because it seems like it's a never-ending loop, right?
Yeah, it's you don't have to. You can stop doing syndications, right? And if you stop doing syndications, you can just or you can buy with your friends and families where you're more comfortable with changing the rules in the middle.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. Any other? That's great. It'll be great if you guys can leave your contact information here, and then so that if you guys want to call each other or get in touch with each other, and then if you want to get in touch with me, please feel free to do that.